Member Townsend.
Here.
Member Cola Pietro. Yes, just a couple of quick announcements. First of all, I want to congratulate our chairman, Jeff Maturo. He has been reappointed as the chairman by the City Council for 2024, as chairman of the LPA. And I also would like to announce that Bob Bornstein has resigned. He submitted his resignation effective December 31st. And just want to thank Bob. Bob has been very influential in the city for many years, not just on this board, but on several other committees, and we wish him well.
Yeah, I'd like to publicly thank Bob. He was like my foil on the board, and I'm going to miss him. Any public comments? All right, seeing none, we're going to move forward. Review of the following land development code amendments for consistency with the City of Bonita Springs Comprehensive Plan, Chapter 4, Article 5, Division 11, Subdivision 2, Downtown Form-Based Code, Section 4-866.
Good morning, everybody. Mike Fegon with Community Development for the record. We'll try not to take up too much of your time this morning. I'm going to go ahead and discuss item 4A, which is the proposed amendments for the Downtown Form-Based Code. And another one of our senior planners, Mary Zizzo, is going to discuss 4B and 4C with you. So just to kind of keep this streamlined for you, and that's really the reason for this amendment. So the form-based code, for those of you that remember when we brought that to LPA back in 2020, was essentially a complete revamp of the code for the downtown district. And the purpose of it was to help spur redevelopment. And it's been in practice for a couple years now, and for those of you that have been downtown, you can see things are moving and shaking pretty well overall, and that's in direct response to this code. One of the things that this code did not have in its original iteration, though, is some type of administrative process to deal with hardships. So as we all know, not every piece of property is created equal, and because of that, we have allowances in other areas of the city where you can ask for what we call variances. And variances are typically reserved for properties or buildings where there's a hardship or there's an extraordinary circumstance where they cannot develop to the black and white of the code. So they need some type of alternative standard to be able to develop to. And like I said, this is a process that exists elsewhere in the city, in Lee County. It goes back to the earlier times of zoning, so it's not a new process. But one of the things that we realize is that we don't have a process for that specifically for the downtown redevelopment area. And that's what this change does. This change sets up an administrative variance process for the commercial corridors in the downtown area. And what we did was we very closely mirrored the proposed criteria to existing criteria elsewhere in the code. So it's not that we're just pulling things out of the clouds, out of thin air to make up these criteria. These criteria exist elsewhere in your code, and we're putting it together to help create this specific process for downtown. So just to kind of go over some of the criteria with you, the biggest thing is making sure that whatever variance you're requesting from whichever code section of downtown, making sure that it is not in conflict with the intent of the form-based code. And if you flip to the second page of your packet, where you see the subheading for Subdivision 2 Downtown Form-Based Code, Section 4-866 General Provisions, the next section under that, subsection A, is the intent of the form-based code. So the very first thing you have to justify when you come forward with this variance is that you are meeting that intent. That is an absolute key component of being considered for an administrative variance for downtown, meeting the intent of the form-based code. So making sure that, again, you're supporting the comprehensive plan, which is a big part of what this board is for, and we have that right there as the first listed intent that you have to meet. Keeping cognizant the elements of scale, aesthetics, predictability, new investment, capitalizing on opportunities to attract the development of a variety of building types, encouraging mixed-use development, promoting development attractive to the past, present, and future, so keeping that in mind, walkable streetscapes, and context-based development and complete streets. So that's going to be the biggest thing, is making sure that if you're going to be requesting a variance from a code section or a different standard to develop to, we got to make sure you're not in conflict with that intent. That's going to be a big key factor. So that's why we listed that as the #1 criteria for the administrative variances. The rest of the criteria are variance criteria that exist elsewhere in the code already. They closely mirror the public hearing variance criteria, and they would be, again, if they're justifying that there is an exceptional or an extraordinary condition or circumstance inherent to the property or the building, and making sure that this exceptional or extraordinary condition or circumstance is not as a result of actions taken by the applicant. So that's a key one, because what we will see sometimes is that the applicants will have an idea in their head of how they want to develop a piece of property, and it has to be this way, but the way they're proposing really doesn't meet the code, and they have no justification for it other than, well, we just want it this way. Well, that's not really going to be a good enough reason for it. So we need to make sure that the reason for these conditions aren't because, you're just wanting it that way for no other reason than just because. That's not really a sound planning principle. So we take that into account. And we also want to make sure that the variance, if it's granted, is the minimum necessary to relieve you of the burden. So for an example, if it's a setback variance because you want to have like this really neat entryway feature, and because of that your building can't be as close to the road as it normally would need to be, we want to make sure that we're giving you just the minimum necessary. So if you can get away with a 12-foot setback, but you're asking for 20, that really doesn't make much sense to us why you need that additional 8 feet if your plan works safely at 12 feet. So that's an example of how that would work. And then also making sure that the granting of the variance will not be injurious to the neighborhood or detrimental to the public welfare. So when we look at what the variance that's being requested is going to be, we'll obviously take a look at what's going on in the surrounding properties and make sure that there's going to be no detriment or injurious effects to the surrounding neighborhood, we'll say. And we also have in there a provision that if the variance were to be denied, the applicant would have the right to appeal the denial. And that's a pretty standard protocol that you have for administrative actions and for public hearing actions. If the applicant doesn't get their desired answer, they have the right to appeal it to City Council. So we have that provision in there. And that's the administrative variance process in a nutshell. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them.
Anybody have any questions? Okay, seeing none, thank you, that was great.
Thank you. Derek, do we want to separate motions or just do it all at one? How would you?
I don't think there's any need for separate motion.
Okay, we'll make one at the end.
Okay, then I will turn it over to Mary.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mary Zizzo, planner with Community Development. So we made some proposed changes to the fence code that we have. Our city continues to expand, so the one-size-fits-all approach isn't necessarily working anymore. So in here, we made a few changes, and I'll go through them little by little. So our existing language states that on each property, the fences must be of uniform materials, design, and color. We found that with certain developments, if it was architecturally consistent, that can be changed. In addition, for properties within the water body setback, areas within the water body setback, which would be your 25 feet from the main high water line in towards the property, since that material has to be open mesh above 3.5 feet, we wanted to provide the applicant an opportunity to use a different material there. So say they have a solid fence along their side property lines, a solid vinyl fence. In that specific water body area, they could switch to an open mesh, chain link, or open picket aluminum, something like that. So within that water body setback area, that would be a different material. In addition, within the agricultural overlay or within San Carlos Estates, we wanted to allow 2 materials. So out there, those properties are very large. They're typically 1.25 acres or so. We're finding that applicants want to be able to put up a nice solid fence or some almost a brick wall appearance or vinyl fence along the front property line, but along the sides where nobody sees the fence, they wanted to do a chain link. Again, those parcels are very large, so to make them use one consistent material didn't quite make sense for those specific districts. If we continue on, much of that stayed the same. We also wanted to add this change regarding residential project fences for pools. Because the Florida Building Code has changed, we wanted to become more consistent with that. So where a seawall or riprap exists and there is a pool, the wings of the fence, meaning the overhang beyond the seawall, is required to extend 18 inches beyond that point. So that change right there in 1467 is consistent with Florida Building Code. Moving down to commercial fences, currently we have it where chain link fencing is not permitted within commercial areas. However, an exception exists for open storage. We are receiving many commercial properties that are looking to do chain link fencing, and in certain scenarios it is appropriate. So we wanted to change that so that it's an architecturally pleasing fence. It's a green or black powder coated chain link fence. It's not just, the typical metal. And then that continuous visual screening is provided to match that height. So that would mean that shrubs, bushes, hedges need to match that same height, so you won't see the fence. But it still gives them the opportunity to use that chain link fence.
They're both requirements.
Correct. We'll keep moving. The change regarding high voltage transformers, we're still working with legal on the language. However, with the change in statutes and preemptions, we wanted to be more consistent with that specific section. And then entrance gates, we receive a lot of feedback that entrance gates can't go to many developments based on our current language. So we repealed and replaced this language based on consistency with other jurisdictions nearby. What this would allow, to sum it up, is that certain cases don't require the required stacking or the 100-foot minimum distance from the right-of-way. So this would allow our director, or if it's a public road, it would be the director of public works, or it would be the county, depending on which type of road it is, to determine that the minimum 5-vehicle stacking is not required. Similarly, with many commercial developments are doing entrance gates or service gates that are open all day. And so, again, those specific locations typically couldn't allow for the 5-vehicle stacking or the 100-foot requirement. So this says that if that gate is open all day, then it does not need to meet those locational standards. And then lastly, with the fence section, we added a portion regarding hedges at the request of Public Works. Hedges do not require a permit, but it provides an enforcement mechanism so that visibility is not affected and that the right-of-way is still maintained. At this time, do you have any questions regarding the fence code changes?
Did you have a question?
Yes.
Yeah, a couple of things. On the chain link fencing that's
Yes.
powder coated, I know we're going to, you require also a hedge covering, but have we determined how long the powder coating lasts on a chain link fencing? Because that become an eyesore if it becomes eroded over a period of time.
We don't have any specific languages that, and no, we have not done that research. However, if a if a fence is in disrepair, we can always use neighborhood services to enforce that it needs to be maintained
I think it's,
or replaced.
I think it's something that should be looked into.
We can definitely consider that. Thank you.
And also, on the fencing around the high-power electrical,
Yes.
do we have a surveillance system as well, or is it just fencing with barbed wire?
We do not have a surveillance system. It's strictly the fencing with barbed
Is
wire.
that
at this
something
time.
under consideration?
As far as compliance goes, those specific facilities are already highly governed, so that would be another item that we would have to take on for enforcement purposes. But we could have internal discussions regarding that to see if there's any additional items we could add there.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to say good morning to John. John, good morning. I've got a question that might or might not be an issue. For the fences that are requiring shrubs to be the same height, how long are we giving them? Say they plant new plants. How long do we give them for those to reach the height that they need to be?
They have 1 year to match that height.
1 year, okay. Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
you.
Then we can move on to employee living facilities. This section was created at the request of council as we had a similar case for the employees of Bonita Bay. So in the event that we have future requests for a company to provide employee living facilities, then these regulations would be applicable there. And it gives us some locational standards. We did take the inspiration from the city over Orlando. You know, they have many parks there, and they need a location for their employees to live, so this is a similar concept. So to sum it up, the employee living facility definition is provided there. Essentially, it's a group quarter establishment provided at or by the direction of an employer company where they may share bedrooms, common areas, bathrooms, and/or kitchen facilities on a temporary or permanent basis, owned and controlled by an employer company for the purpose of those employees as residents and their immediate families, and those employees shall be, or the residents shall be directly employed by the common employer company. They shall be permitted within any multifamily residential district where multifamily dwelling units are a permitted use. So that means it could be commercial or multifamily zoning districts. And then in plan developments, they may be administratively amended to add this to their schedule of uses. The facilities must comply with the zoning district provisions for the district for multifamily dwelling units and/or principal commercial structures as applicable. The architectural standards are further clarified, but essentially we wanted to make sure that those facilities, and we'll get further into it later, architecturally are compatible with, they don't necessarily have to match the exact buildings right around there, but that, you know, it is an architecturally pleasing building. It's not just a warehouse type style. We did add a proximity requirement that says that the facility must be within 2 miles from the employer office facilities. Alternatively, if a transportation service is provided during the office hours of operation, then that proximity location will go away. For density purposes, these facilities would be provided an equivalency at 4 people equals 1 multifamily dwelling unit, and that same rate would apply for impact fees. As previously mentioned, for architectural standards, we want to make sure that those buildings would meet our Chapter 3 standards as well as be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. You're not going to have, you know, a 6-story building right next to a 1-story house. And to make sure that they integrate into the surrounding neighborhood. And to provide an assessment of impacts to noise and traffic. For the approval section, we created a 3-step approach here. So first, they'll need to do a zoning verification letter to make sure that that use is actually permitted at that location. They'll, at that time, provide us a survey to make sure that the locational standards are met. And then they will need a development order and a building permit to make sure that the site standards are complied with and that the building inside meets what we require. So this would make sure that no random building can say, now we're doing employee living facilities. No, now we're going to double check that you have enough parking, that noise will not be an issue, and that traffic will not be an issue. Further, that the building does meet our current building code. And then lastly, for the employee living facility renewal. We're still coordinating with city staff on the specifics, but essentially, they'll have to, of course, maintain all of their records at any point. We may be able to request those, and we may require an inspection to make sure that the site is in compliance at all times. Any questions?
Can you give me an example of an employee living facility in Bonita Springs?
Talking to the mic. Talking to the mic.
Can you give me an example of an employee living facility in Bonita Springs?
So the first case we've experienced was Bonita Bay. They wanted a place to house their employees. So they took one of their, I believe it was an existing commercial building, and turned it into living facilities.
Okay. So prior to that, that hasn't been an issue?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Anybody have any questions? Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
All right, so we'll go ahead and make a motion to approve these amendments. Someone want to make that motion?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye. I'm sorry, who's the second? Who's the second? Dan, okay.
Before you take the vote on that, see if there's any public comment on any.
Anybody have any public comment? Okay.
Okay.
So no comment, we made the motion, they seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye. So that is approved.
Any opposed?
We have an update from October LPA meeting.
Jackie, I was thinking for the benefit of the new member, maybe you can explain the process now that these proposed amendments have been heard by the LPA. What's the next step? What are the next steps?
Sure. For the record, Jacqueline Genson with Community Development. I'm the Planning and Zoning Manager. So typically, in a situation like this where we have land development code amendments, per Florida statute, the local planning agency is responsible for reviewing those amendments to find them consistent with the local jurisdiction's comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan is essentially the roadmap for development of the city. It's our long-range plan. Typically, our planning horizon is 20 years. So when we do amendments such as these, we present them to this board to go ahead and meet that statutory requirement. Once we do that, we take your feedback, we discuss it internally. We can make changes if necessary. And then at that point, the amendments are then ready to be scheduled for city council. So the land development code is adopted by ordinance, and based on Florida statute, ordinances are adopted by a two-step public hearing process. So we have a first reading, and for land development code amendments, we read essentially what we call the title block of the ordinance into the record, and we present the information to the council. And at that time, we would let them know what the LPA had suggested at that hearing for recommended changes or concerns. And then council will go ahead and deliberate. It is a public hearing, so the public is welcome to speak. And then at that time, they make a motion to go ahead and move to second reading, or they can have staff go back and make changes and bring it back. But typically, they move it to what we call second reading. And the second reading is effectually the adoption hearing. So then there's another public hearing where the amendments are then presented to the council again with those changes, another opportunity for public comment, and then if it's council's pleasure to adopt, they can adopt as is or adopt with changes, or not adopt.
Question on nomenclature. I'm familiar with master
Sorry.
plans, comprehensive management plans, and developmental ordinances. So is the comprehensive and master plan the same here, or?
So we don't have a master
You don't
plan.
have one, okay.
For this purpose. So the Florida statute requires that cities adopt comprehensive plans. It's part of the Growth Management Act. So we refer to the long-range plan as our comprehensive plan
Okay.
for long-range planning.
Sorry.
No problem. And perhaps there might be another opportunity for us to have some joint workshops with the zoning board and local planning agency for, it's always good to keep up on changes in state law.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So what happened in October? So we had the wireless communication facilities update come to you, to this board, for just direction based on direction we were given by the council. We are in the process of scheduling those for first and second reading. And that's where we're at. And then the next agenda item, For the next meeting, we did think that we were going to have a case ready to come before you in February. They are not ready, so we may not have a February meeting, but we will definitely keep the clerk's office posted. But we'll let you know by the end of the week if we have a February meeting.
Okay.
Okay?
Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
John, you and your staff always do a great job. Thank you. Next meeting tentatively scheduled for February 15th. Well, we just heard there's a really good chance we're not having it, so we'll wait to hear our next meeting.
Keep you posted.
Okay. I need a motion for approval of minutes from the last meeting.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I'll abstain as I wasn't here.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
Yep. I'd like to thank publicly the fire district for letting